Well, hello, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome back. I am Tamara L., and welcome to another installation of Just Another Messenger, where we raise the situational urgency and consciousness regarding today's current events. Now, we can no longer ignore, hide, and escape the past, which tells us about our present circumstance and predicts our future. Therefore, each episode of Just Another Messenger, we're going to dive deep into the historical past by examining the philosophies, legal system, and the political decisions that continues to influence our daily lives. Now, I know we've been gone for a week, but in part one of When the Trickster Falls, the Jackal's last game, we unraveled the symbolic legacy of the Jackal, exploring how a cunning figure from mythology mirrors the rise, dominance, and show unraveling U.S. power. Now, in this episode, we're going to continue with our deep dive by outlining the U.S. Western government's evolution from a hidden manipulation in the post-Civil War era to an overreaching empire in the 24th century. So we're going to deal from their independence of 1783 through the Treaty of Paris to the current day digital age. Now, join in the conversation. Now, in order to do that, I know some people have said that they're not able to comment over on Facebook. We've tried to fix that issue. Don't know what's going on. But however, you can go over on our Facebook page, subscribe, share, and like button, as well as join in the conversation and be a part of the thought-provoking conversation we're about to have. And as we continue to have every Wednesday, you don't want to miss this. Now, what we have here, you can also continue to be a part of our what our different modalities we have over on X at JAM, JAM _404 podcast. And if you or someone you know would like to be a part of the show, please, you can send their email. We have their email. We're going to put that on that page right there. You can send an email to JustAnotherMessengerPodcast@gmail.com. And we like to thank our donors who donate and provide their currency to the show to keep the show alive and to keep the show going. We want to thank you in advance for that. And if you would like to also start donating and be a part of the conversations to keep it going, you can do that via CashApp at $JustAnotherMessenger. So we have that information up on the screen. We're going to keep that there. All right. And before we do that, we're going to take a quick break before we get started here. All right. We back. I know I'm excited to be back. I came on Wednesday and just wanted to talk to everyone on my personal Facebook page. I'm excited to be back. Took some time off, had to work on some things regarding the book Sacred Selfishness. So as we get started with today, we have a lot to unpack, and let us go ahead and do that with our disclaimer. The views, opinions, and thoughts are the protective expression of Tamara L. for storytelling and educational purposes, and does not provide statutory counseling for any United States color of law jurisdictional proceeding. But I promise you, the information I provide will take you around the direct road. All right, now let's get started with what's going on around the world here. Now we're going to call this thing Project Colonization 2025. Tamara, why are we going to call this Project Colonization 2025? Because it's the continued fight for territorial rights. Also, Greenland's president made an announcement that it is not for sale, Trump. It said it is not for sale, okay? And Netanyahu, he is very quiet about Trump, and he's announced the U.S. plans on Israel's reconstruction while leaving the office empty-handed when Trump said, maybe not. as he holds firm on the tariffs of Israel. Now we're going to get into the connection of all this, and then Hamas continue to hold firm on their fight to maintain control of their territorial rights. Now, keep in mind, Zelensky has yet to sign that $15 trillion valuation of the Ukraine mineral rights to the United States. As President Trump continued the removal of the Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelans, asylum seekers, as well as Mexican migrants, he's also looking at, U.S. citizens that protected through birthright citizenship from the U.S. jurisdiction. Now, this has really upset the community of Miami, the Latin and Cuban community, because they're feeling a little bit betrayed because they have that out there with their sambas and salsas and neighbors. Da, 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 they were getting it in. They feel a little betrayed after fighting so hard to help Trump secure the Latin American votes in Florida. So Trump have a lot of answers to do to them. Now, President Trump has recently, as of yesterday, he's put a pause on this tariff debacle that's going on, this tariff war that was starting to kick up. He's saying, I think I'm going to put a little stop to that. So President Trump has put a pause on the tariff with all the trading partners for 90 days, except for China. He feel like he got to teach China a lesson. So instead, he's increased China's tariff to 125%. Until China learn how to realize the days of ripping off the U.S. is no longer sustainable. However, the U.S. Representative Jameson Gear, he was in a House committee meeting and he was so excited about the presentation he had done. He didn't even know that Trump had decided to go ahead and put a pause on the 90-day tariff. I mean, he was giving his whole entire presentation. Someone said, were you aware there's a 90 days? He was like, oh, no, I didn't get the memo on that. So, yeah, there's a 90-day hold on that tariff of all the trading partners. And China said, well, you know what? Since you're going to put a 125% tariff on us, we're going to respond with the 84% tariff on the U.S. imports. And the days of, and he said, you know what, we're also going to do, United States, the days of protecting the U.S. intellectual property rights are over. So it's going to be hard pressed seeing a luxury product and saying, oh, this is Louis, this is Gucci. It's going to be hard pressed to identify which one is which one is fake and which one is real, because China said we're no longer protecting United States intellectual property rights, such as their purses, shoes, clothes. So those knockoffs that's going to be created, they're going to say, we creating one for you and one for us. So they're starting to print the same items for themselves for sale. So good luck saying you got a Birkin. You don't know if you got a Birkin or a Durkin. All right. Now, on another news, we're going to send these prayers out to the families affected by the deadly accident that happened over in DR. So we're going to have a minute of prayer for that. When the roof collapsed at a club, there's been over 100 people has died in that event. Now, I've been down to DR, did not care for DR, but however, we're still sending prayers out to those ones that are affected and their loved ones. So there's so much more going on around the world. However, we want to show a current trend in this territorial jurisdictional fight that's going on called Project Colonization 2025 in relationship to the movement of Jackal. Now, to understand the Jackal from Ampu, its Egyptian origin to America, we must continue to follow its path. And how do we continue to follow its path, Tamara? Now, as you can recall in episode 1, we learned about the Egyptian origin of the four-legged jackal, being depicted as a guardian for the soul of the dead. Now, as words and meanings change over time, we'll show how the U.S. defines the two-legged jackal. That's what we're going to do. So the U.S. Western government hasn't officially coined the term jackal in its policy or public addresses, but it has absolutely lived by the metaphor in which it created and rebranded. Now, in doing so, the term was popularized in the political slang and intellectual circles, especially during the Cold War and beyond. And we're going to show you that. And it describes how covert operatives such as the CIA or the FBI, they use trained assassins as well as expendable agents. They were used by powerful institutions to do the dirty work. And as you evaluate the picture of Ben Franklin, he's shaking the hand of an indigenous chief there. Now, his actions became very clear. It became very clear that he was indeed a jackal on the loose. Now, Ben Franklin's strategy was manipulating nature with the idea of slavery for the indigenous people and liberty for his British brethren at large. But Ben Franklin and his other corporate lords of the British North American colonies, they had completed their mission of finding a new nation in North America, and it leading to the overthrow of hundreds of indigenous American nations, as well as other nations such as France, Spain, Sardinia, and the Dutch. They were all involved in the demise, so we're not going to let them get a pass there. Now, this gave them jurisdictional sovereignty to the territorial with a sole agenda of colonization, subjugation, domination, and territorial jurisdiction over the land, water, natural resources, as well as the people, not the lie to escape the British and religious persecution from the king, as written in the GD textbooks. You see this play continue to the day. It continues to move forward to the day. And so as we look at that, let's look here at this map of North America of 1783. Now, as you can see, the U.S. independence is framed as a cunning move. Now, it started off as small colonies, 13 different small corporate colonies, right? And those 13 different small colonies, they outwitted the British Empire. And they did that through war. Now, when they signed the Treaty of Paris in 1783, they didn't just end the war, it passed the torch. Now, through the Treaty of Paris that was signed on September 3rd, 1783, between the American colonies and Great Britain, it ended the American Revolution, then formally recognized the United States as an independent nation. That's where that birth of a nation is coined from. Now, this new nation, it rose from the ashes like the phoenix bird that is engraved on its currency as of today. Now, keep in mind, the birth of the nation inherited more than just land. It inherited British war against the indigenous nations. Now, Tamara, let's look at this, and I'm going to show you proof of that. Now, why do we say Britain's war against the indigenous nation? Because I'm going to show you that because in 1978, signers of the British North America, Lord proprietors, they signed a treaty with the Delaware Nation. And let's look at what that treaty reads so you could be able to understand that in its full text. Let's look at that. All right, here. All right, here we go. All right, let's look at this. Let's look at this treaty here. It's saying, all right, treaty with the Delawares of 1778. We're just going to take a look at articles, the contracting party, and then we're going to take a look at Article 3. And it's a articles of agreement and confederation. That means to join together, confederation, made and entered into by Andrew and Thomas Lewis. He was Esquire. So you see Esquire, that's someone who is of the law body. Okay. And it's commissioners for and in behalf of the United States of North America of the one port, and Captain White Eyes, Captain John Keel Buck Jr., and Captain Pipe, deputies and chief men of, they were the chiefs. So these were the various chiefs of that nation. They was chief men of the Delaware Nation of the other port. Now let's look at this. Let's look at Article 3. And we're not going to go all into it, but you can always find this information online. Let's look at Article 3. It said, and whereas the United States are engaged in a just and necessary war in defense and support of life, liberty, and independence against the King of England and is his inheritance, and as said king is yet possessed of several posts and forts on the lakes and other places, the reduction of which is of great importance to the peace and security of the contracting parties. So, which means that they were seeking protection from these nations, from these indigenous nations. Here they were seeking protection from these indigenous nations throughout the eastern seaboard at the time, in order to be able to have their commerce and no longer be a part of that. So, as you can see, the American Revolution of 1783 and the Treaty of Paris, it was a betrayal. Let's look at that. It was a betrayal against the indigenous people nations. Now, the Treaty of Paris established territorial sovereignty for the United States, as well as it created the Northwest Ordinance, which led to the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, while leading the way through the Manifest Destiny. Now, the Manifest Destiny also annexed in Texas, as you can see, of 1845. Also, you can see the Florida Purchase from Spain in 1821. You see the Mexican secession. So they say build a wall. Well, there's no need to build a wall when the invisible line came across the Mexican nation. So this created the Mexican secession of 1848, as well as created the regional country British claims established in 1846, and it created the annexation of the lease of Alaska from Russia to the United States, and as literally as recent as 1954, it created the secession of what is known as Hawaii from King Kokalani. So as you can see, that this American Revolution and the signing and the ceding from the British king to the United States, this was a betrayal. It was a pure betrayal. And this was created the territorial sovereignty here. Now let's look at that. Let's put a pin in this territorial jurisdiction and what this means, because this is discussed today. And in order to understand what is being discussed today, you have to understand what you're looking at here. Let's look at this. This is the pinpoint of 1783, where the indigenous people, now classified as Black, Negro, Colored, and African American, lost their nationhood status and became citizens of the United States, which brought about the Naturalization Act. Now, this is where within a new society, it becomes codified of the subjugation of an overthrown nation. Now, is in the Constitution, as you can see, now this is why they can't deport you, because you're already home, Dorothy. You're already home. Just click your heels. Let's look at what this territorial jurisdiction mean. It's the power of a state to exercise its authority over people, property, and its territory. It's codified in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the United States, which is the federal territorial jurisdictional clause. And it's also codified in Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution. This is the territorial sovereignty, which is managed by Congress. All right. However, just as you click your heels and realize that you're home, they codify stricter laws in their society, in their new nation, for the enforcement of slavery. So slavery never went away. It was never prohibited. Involuntary servitude is prohibited, but involuntary servitude is not prohibited through the codification in the Constitution of the 13th Amendment. So that's what makes slavery to exist through any type of crime that's enacted, and that's how it increased the prison pipeline. Now let's look at this. As we continue to go forward, now that you see how you're under subjugation, now that you're looking at this, now that you see how you're under subjugation, colonization, which usurps all the natural resources of the land, let's look how these resources are being controlled. Let's look at that. The resources of the land are being controlled based off of an agreement. And this agreement is called the Buttonwood Agreement. And let's see how this Buttonwood Agreement took place on May the 17th, 1792, and what this Buttonwood Agreement means.
Hello and welcome to History Pod. On the 17th of May 1792, the Buttonwood Agreement was signed by 24 stockbrokers, establishing the foundations of the New York Stock Exchange. In March and April 1792, barely a year after the creation of the Bank of the United States, a financial panic rocked confidence in the fledgling American economy. Easy credit, combined with rampant speculation by bankers such as William Duer and Alexander Macomb, led to an unsustainable rise in the price of securities that inevitably plummeted. Without any safeguards in place, and at a time when securities were often bought and sold in auction houses with unpredictable prices and high commissions, public confidence in the market plummeted. In the midst of the panic of 1792, a group of 24 brokers and merchants met to discuss possible regulations in an attempt to restore trust in the securities business. On the 17th of May, they met again to sign the Buttonwood Agreement, named after the buttonwood tree in New York City's Wall Street, where they traditionally met to conduct their trades. The Buttonwood Agreement was significant for two regulatory reasons. Firstly, the brokers guaranteed that they would not try to undercut each other by setting a fixed floor commission rate of 0.25%. This reduced the risk of manipulative pricing and competition between brokers. Secondly, the signatories agreed to only ever trade with each other, closing the system to outsiders who might be less scrupulous. With the knowledge that every broker operated by the same rules, they could trust that the market prices were fair and that the deals would be honoured. These original New York stockbrokers initially traded from the Tontine Coffee House at 82 Wall Street and moved to their first dedicated trading space in 1817.
Now, we're talking about commodities. We're talking about territorial jurisdiction to the land, the resources. This is the wealth. Okay, Tamara, what are we talking about here? We're talking about commodities. What are commodities? We're talking about goods that have a universal price around the world, such as gold, for example, has the same price per ounce in Brazil and Bombay. A commodity can be refined from a raw element that comes from the earth, such as oil is refined from petroleum. A commodity can also be mined directly from the earth, such as a metal, or it can also be an agricultural product. So when there's a removal of the people from the resources from which they have dominion, custody, and control of that transfer it over to someone else, and now you become under subjugation to that which you could now create, which you're no longer able to utilize and create wealth. Someone else now has stolen your wealth, and that's why the people are now subject to and have to work like we're working today, because we have been subjects and subjugated from the society in which we were a part of. Now, let's look at these commodities. In agriculture, you have wheat, corn, coffee, cotton, and a whole host of other agriculture that are commodities of the earth. Now, you also have the metals, gold, silver, copper, platinum, energy. You have crude oil, natural gas, gasoline, ethanol, livestock. You have live cattle, lean hogs, feeder, chickens. You have a host of other items that are commodities that are of the earth, that are the wealth building tools for any and all nations. We're going to make sense of this. What are these factors influencing commodity prices? It could be economics, which is demand and supply, such as oil. Examples of oil and the corn, the demand and supply for those agricultural products. The dollar. Now, the dollar is a creation of the United States, new nation. It is its currency. It is its form, is its medium exchange of currency created for circulation, and it's tracked through the dollar index. And we're going to get into that. Also, the factors that could influence commodity pricing could be the price of oil. Now, look at speculation. What do we have speculation there? We have let's think about this, and you're going to laugh when you see this, but it's really nothing to laugh about. All right. Speculation is someone that goes on the news and they will give a report about a particular commodity or what's going on in a business model plan that may be favorable or unfavorable. And that triggers a speculation in the market to either buy or sell. Now, a lot of times if you're buying, they call it a bull and a bear market. Now, if you're buying, you could buy low and make money, and you can make money also on the rise. So that is speculation. Now, this speculation is also what's her name? What's her name? She went to jail for insider trading, someone giving her knowledge and information about what was going to take place within the market, and for her to be able to tap into it. Now, you also have economic cycles, and you have the stock market that takes place. Now, let's look at the major commodity exchanges that are out there. And these are just as few. These are some that's in the Western. You also have the Asian exchanges and the African exchanges as well. But in the Western, you have the Chicago Board of Trade. You have the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. You have the New York Board of Trade. Now, you have the New York Mercantile Exchange, the Commodity Exchange, the London Metals Exchange. Now, people say, oh, you want to know, like, I was given a bag full of coins, and if you want to know the pricing of those coins, you can always you can go and put in the year of that coin and the type of coin. And even though that coin at that time period was made worth, like they say, $1, it could have been worth $1 at that time period when it was pressed. But through inflation, that $1 that was probably minted in 1922, or that $1 that was minted in 1973, it has increased in value. So it's no longer that price is no longer just priced at $1. It has not lost its value. So it has value. So it has more cost factor in there. So that is how the currency increases, and the price of the commodities increases as well. And so this is where you have that. Now, we're going to look at how commodities is codified in the law. We're going to look at how the commodities as well as the art is codified in law. We're going to look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the Constitution, where it reads, the Congress shall have power to promote the progress of science and useful art by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discovery. Remember, we said earlier that China stated they were no longer going to be protecting the intellectual property of the United States. Well, China is not bound by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8. However, the United States, because they codified this in the Constitution, the United States is bound by the protection of the intellectual rights, which is part of the freedom of speech and expression in its Constitution. But let's look at some art. Let's look at how life imitates art. Let's look at trading places. Now, you remember I was showing you how just recently the Buttonwood Agreement, trading places is life imitating art regarding the Buttonwood Agreement. Remember, we said the Buttonwood Agreement deals with trading in commodities, in futures and speculations. So the movie Trading Places is a preservation of the freedom of expression in art to to give knowledge and understanding of the medium's change of currencies through commodities and Wall Street. And let me show you that. Now, in the movies, Trading Places, there were two brothers. They were business tycoon Randolph and Mortimer Duke. And they decided to play a social scientist and perform an unsanctioned and non-consensual human experiment. Now, let's look at that, because you got to look at the picture right here. This was a human experiment. Let's look at the person that they chose. For this human experiment, they chose it was Eddie Murphy. He's the person of choice. But being a person of choice, he was an indigenous brother, homeless. He's playing this, they chose him. And that's not random. So what is it showing? They're saying that the indigenous person is the true custodian of these resources. So we're going to put him back in his right position and show him that this is where he should be, to be the person to have control of the wealth. And let's see how well he do. So let's look at that. So they chose the indigenous homeless career criminal Billy Ray Valentine, and he's being played as by the actor, forgot his name. All right. So from the mean streets of Philadelphia, they give him a house, a butler, and a high-paying job at their commodity exchange. Now look at this, on Wall Street. Now in the process, then you say Wall Street, the Buttonwood Agreement, it was the creation of Wall Street, the NADEX. Okay. Now in the process, the Duke brothers alienated the life of their employee, Lewis Winthrop III. Now, gonna bring this closer to home. Lewis Winthrop III, there was a Winthrop also that was the signer of the Buttonwood Agreement. Let's look at this. There was 24 founding signers of the Buttonwood Agreement. The two brothers that the movie is depicting was Leonard Blecker. He was a Revolutionary War officer and a prominent broker, and Garrett Noel Blecker. He was a broker and brother to Leonard Blecker. Now, they were well-known Dutch American family, and they was active in the early New York commerce. So they were considered the big movers and shakers of that time period. Now, look at Benjamin Winthrop. Benjamin Winthrop, he was one of the founding signers of the Buttonwood Agreement. Now, wow, didn't it say in the movie that the employee was Lewis Winthrop, and there was two brothers, Randolph and Mortimer Duke? Okay, so that is art imitating life. So the information you see, they have to preserve any movie that is being shown. They have to preserve that art through expression, but it's also providing you a guideline of what actually took place in America. You have to have the eye to see. Signs and symbols are for the conscious mind. And we're going to continue to look at that. Now, as we continue the path of the Jackal, we're going to explore the Gilded Age of Control and how industry, policy, and capital shaped a new empire from the shadows.
When we talk about the Gilded Age, we're often told a story of progress, of steam and steel, of titans who built America. Carnegie, Rockefeller, Morgan, men whose names are etched into universities, foundations, and grand halls. But underneath that polished marble and industrial shine was something far more predatory. This wasn't a noble rise, it was a jackal's ascent, stealthy, strategic, and soaked in opportunism. Today, we're peeling back the golden curtain of the Gilded Age and exposing how the United States government, in collusion with capital, didn't just allow the jackals to run free, it became one. Let's get one thing straight. The Gilded Age wasn't just about economic growth. It was about who got to grow and how that growth was controlled. The U.S. government, wrapped in the myth of hands-off capitalism, actually had its fingers deep in the pie. Railroads were subsidized with millions of acres of land grants. Laws like the Pacific Railway Acts weren't neutral. They were strategic feeding grounds, allowing corporations like Union Pacific to spread like claws across the continent. But who paid the price? Farmers were squeezed by railroad monopolies, forced to accept outrageous shipping rates or face economic strangulation. Indigenous nations were displaced, their lands chopped up and sold to settlers and speculators under the Dawes Act, an act of erasure disguised as assimilation. Control wasn't just economic, it was territorial, cultural, systemic. Now let's talk teeth, because the jackal didn't just circle its prey, it sank in hard. Take Andrew Carnegie. He championed philanthropy with one hand, while with the other, he backed violent union busting at the Homestead Steel Strike. Pinkerton detectives, hired guns, were brought in to break workers who dared ask for dignity. The message was clear: speak up and we'll bite. Or John D. Rockefeller. Through Standard Oil, he pioneered the art of the trust, a system that choked out competition, gobbled up small operators, and dictated the flow of one of the country's most essential resources. He didn't just dominate oil, he controlled the very rules of the game. Even banking, traditionally seen as a separate sphere, was devoured. J.P. Morgan didn't just finance railroads, he bought them when they failed, restructured them under his vision, and then bailed out the federal government in 1895 when its gold reserves dwindled. When the state faltered, it turned not to the people, but to the predator. What made the jackal truly dangerous wasn't just its appetite, it was its home, and that home was Congress. The Gilded Age saw some of the most brazen corruption in American history. Senators weren't elected by the people, they were chosen by state legislatures, which meant the richest men in the room could quite literally buy representation. Lobbyists roamed freely. Political machines like Tammany Hall didn't serve democracy, they sold it. Even presidents, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, and Cleveland, struggled or outright refused to tame the beast. The federal government didn't regulate monopolies, it protected them. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 passed with a bark, enforced with a whimper, until much later. In this den of deals and dollars, the jackal roamed unchallenged. And then there were those left in the shadows, the people the jackal stepped over or chewed through. Black Americans in the South, just a decade removed from slavery, found their fleeting freedom crushed under Jim Crow. Sharecropping became the new shackle. Voting rights were stolen with poll taxes and literacy tests, while lynch mobs enforced white supremacy with blood. Immigrants were welcomed at Ellis Island with one hand and exploited in sweatshops with the other. Chinese laborers built the West, but were met with exclusion, violence, and systemic hatred. Women had no political voice. Children worked in mines. The working class lived in tenement squalor while the elite built mansions in Newport and Fifth Avenue palaces. The jackal didn't just feed, it devoured, ruthlessly, unapologetically, and always with a smile. So what does it mean to say the U.S. acted like a jackal during the Gilded Age? It means the state colluded with capital to create an ecosystem of control. It means progress was a performance, and power was preserved through manipulation, not merit. The jackal never left. It means the very institutions we were taught to trust were complicit in the hunt. The Gilded Age was not an exception. It was a blueprint. In conclusion, the jackal never left a moment when the jackal removed its mask and taught future generations how to conquer without conscience. And maybe, just maybe, that jackal still walks among us saying, "Make America great again." Now, you have a call to action. If this story made you rethink what you thought you knew, make sure to subscribe, like, and share at Just Another Messenger. Drop a comment. Where do you see the jackal today? Let's talk about it. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and don't be fooled by the gold.
Now, as we continue the pathway of the jackal, we're going to see how the double face of world wars, where there was liberty abroad and oppression at home.
In the great theaters of World War I and II, the United States sold itself as a beacon of freedom, a reluctant hero stepping in to save the world. But let's be honest, Behind the patriotic speeches and war bond posters was something far more calculating. The U.S. didn't just enter the wars as a savior, it entered like a jackal, watching, waiting, profiting, then pouncing when the prey was weak and the opportunity ripe. This is the story of the double face of world wars, and how America played the part of both liberator and opportunist. At the start of World War I, the United States was officially neutral. But let's not kid ourselves. While Europe bled, American factories boomed. U.S. banks loaned billions to the Allies, fueling their war machine with the kind of interest rates that made Wall Street salivate. The longer the war dragged on, the more the U.S. stood to gain. That's classic jackal behavior. Stay out of the fight, but feast on the spoils. President Woodrow Wilson claimed neutrality, but behind closed doors, the U.S. was arming one side, profiting from both and watching the chessboard shift. After the war, President Wilson pushed for peace. But peace on whose terms? The Treaty of Versailles didn't just punish Germany. It redrew maps, installed puppet economies, and planted the seeds of the next global conflict. The U.S. didn't sign the treaty, but make no mistake, it profited from it. The war left Europe in rubble. The U.S. stood tall, economically untouched, and richer than ever. This was the new order. The jackal didn't fight to win, it waited for others to tear each other apart, then stepped in to reshape the world in its image. Banks, industry, agriculture, the U.S. became the lender and supplier to the world. And then, in the shadow of peace, came the next opportunity. When World War II began in 1939, the United States once again stayed back. It didn't rush to help Poland or France or even the United Kingdom, not at first. But it did restart its wartime economy. The U.S. sold weapons under Lend-Lease, sent steel, oil, and ammunition, again to the Allies. And all the while, its factories reawakened from the Great Depression. America didn't dive into the war. It hovered, watched, supplied. Then came Pearl Harbor, and the jackal pounced again, this time with claws out. But even then, war was more than just a battle against fascism. It was a chance to reshape global power once more. And this time, the U.S. wouldn't just profit from the war, it would dominate the aftermath. Victory wasn't the final goal, control was. By 1945, the U.S. had done what no other nation could, dropped the first atomic bombs, not to end the war faster, but to send a message to the Soviets. Hosted the Bretton Woods Conference, creating the IMF and World Bank, institutions that made the U.S. the heartbeat of global finance, helped design the United Nations with a permanent seat at the table and veto power. Germany was occupied. Japan was remade in America's image. Europe was rebuilt, not just with aid, but with strings attached. The Marshall Plan didn't just bring food and infrastructure, it brought markets. The U.S. wasn't just ending a war, it was building an empire of influence, all under the banner of peace. The jackal doesn't just win battles, it wins the aftermath. The U.S. helped defeat Hitler. True. The U.S. liberated concentration camps. Also true. But here's the other truth. The U.S. emerged from both wars as the dominant global power not by chance, but by design. It picked its moment, profited from the chaos, then used victory to reshape the world on its terms. That's the jackal's way, not brute strength, but timing, strategy, and calculated morality. We love to tell stories of American greatness, and yes, the U.S. did help bring down fascism. But we can't ignore the double face, the dual identity of a nation that stood for liberty while feeding on opportunity. The world wars didn't just build American power, they revealed American strategy. And if we don't recognize the jackal in the mirror, we'll keep mistaking cunning for courage and control for freedom. If this gave you a new angle on history, hit that like button, subscribe at Just Another Messenger, and let's keep the conversation going. Also, drop a comment below on the question, was the U.S. a savior in the world wars, or something more complicated? Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and never forget, jackals don't roar, they wait.
No, jackals don't roar, they wait. And they roared during the 1920s, during the Red Scare of the 1920s, which dealt with CIA coups, proxy wars, and domestic oppression.
History loves to highlight the loudest moments: nuclear tests, Berlin Walls, space races. But the Cold War wasn't won in mushroom clouds or moon landings. It was fought in shadows, whispered through secrets. And in those shadows, the United States didn't move like a lion charging in. It slinked like a jackal, listening, manipulating, feeding off the fear it helped create. This is the Cold War's Whisper campaign and how the US mastered the art of psychological war, silent sabotage, and global puppetry. The Cold War was a chess match between two superpowers, but one player wasn't just interested in checkmate. It wanted to control the board without ever flipping it over. After World War II, the Soviet Union stood bloodied but bold, and the US emerged untouched and triumphant. But instead of a direct clash, both powers slipped into a game of perception, subversion, and information control. The Jackal didn't roar into battle, it whispered. That whisper, the Red Scare. Domestically, the US government turned its own people into suspects. Senators like Joseph McCarthy didn't need evidence, just accusation. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover became a whisper network of its own, planting paranoia in boardrooms, classrooms, and film studios. People lost jobs, reputations, even lives, not from Soviet invasion, but from American fear. Fear that the US itself fed. While Americans were being told to duck and cover, the Jackal was busy slipping through foreign back doors. Iran, 1953. The CIA orchestrates the overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. Why? He nationalized oil. The whisper? He's a communist. The truth? He was a threat to Western business. Wherever the whisper of communism could be used as a pretext, Congo, Chile, Indonesia, Vietnam, the US crept in, not with armies, but with suitcases of cash, briefcases of blackmail, and carefully crafted misinformation. The Jackal didn't need to conquer, it just needed to destabilize. But the Cold War wasn't just fought abroad, it was won, or warped in the American mind. The US government knew, if you control perception, you control the people. Enter Operation Mockingbird, where journalists were recruited by the CIA to plant stories favorable to US foreign policy. Enter MKUltra, where the CIA experimented on unwitting citizens in a twisted search for mind control, using drugs, torture, hypnosis, all in the name of staying one step ahead of the Soviets. Meanwhile, Hollywood was mobilized. Films, radio, comics, all carried the subtle and sometimes not so subtle message: freedom good, communism evil, trust us, fear them. The Jackal didn't just whisper in government halls, it whispered through your TV set. The Soviet Union spent money on missiles, the United States on markets. Through institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and later USAID, the US offered help, but with strings. Loans tied to privatization, development tied to deregulation. A Cold War-era economic whisper campaign that told nations, you don't need Moscow, you need Wall Street. And when the Soviet Union began to crack in the 80s, it wasn't tanks that crushed it, it was debt, isolation, whispers of dissent. The Cold War didn't end with a bang. It ended with a whisper fading into silence. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet flag came down. The United States stood alone atop the global stage, not because it outmuscled its enemy, but because it outmaneuvered it. It spread fear to unify its own people. It used information as a weapon. It toppled governments without boots on the ground. It sold freedom with conditions. And it silenced dissent with a smile. That's not the story of a noble warrior. That's the story of a jackal in the long grass, feeding on ideology, fear, and global instability, then walking away as if it had nothing to do with the blood in the sand. So what do we learn from the Cold War's whisper campaign? That power doesn't always shout. that control isn't always declared, and that history's good guys often wear two faces. The United States didn't just fight communism, it used it as a smokescreen for empire building, economic control, and narrative domination. And if you listen closely, that whisper, it never really stopped. If this changed how you see the Cold War, go ahead and subscribe and share at Just Another Messenger with someone who still believes the Jackal was a hero. Drop a comment regarding the question, where else do you hear the whispers today? Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and never trust silence when it serves power.
And silence will never serve its power, as the Jackal has now reached its fall, and it's reached its fall by creating an environment where it now has become its own prisoner.
In the wake of burning towers and broken lives, America vowed never to be caught off guard again. But the way it went about that promise didn't look like resilience. It looked like obsession. And in that obsession, the hunter, the Jackal, turned its gaze inward. This is the story of how, in the name of safety, the United States became the ultimate predator of digital life, and how it slowly locked itself in a cage of its own making. 9/11 wasn't just a national tragedy, it was a psychological rupture. The U.S., a global jackal known for lurking overseas, toppling regimes, and pulling strings from the shadows, was suddenly exposed, vulnerable. And when the Jackal gets hurt, it doesn't retreat, it evolves. Enter the Patriot Act. Passed just weeks after the attacks, it granted the government sweeping powers to surveil, detain, and investigate without traditional checks. Wiretaps, email monitoring, financial tracking, all under the flag of national security. Americans didn't question it. They were afraid. And fear makes surveillance seductive. The Jackal had a new hunting ground, its own people. Behind the scenes, 3 letters were becoming God's NSA. The National Security Agency had been around since World War II, but post 9/11, it became omnipresent. Phone calls, browser history, social media footprints, all fair game. Through programs like PRISM, X-Keyscore, and Boundless Informant, the U.S. wasn't just watching terrorists. It was watching everyone. And who built the infrastructure for this? Not just government agencies, but Silicon Valley. Tech companies handed over user data, or were quietly forced to. Google, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft. They became both victims and accomplices in the biggest digital surveillance net in human history. The Jackal didn't just have eyes on the ground anymore, it had eyes in your pocket. In 2013, Edward Snowden shattered the illusion. He exposed just how deep the Jackal's claws had gone. Americans learned they were being watched, even if they'd done nothing wrong. And so were foreign leaders, allies, and entire populations. The U.S. wasn't just hunting threats. It was collecting everything, just in case. The reaction? Half outrage, half apathy. The Jackal had trained its prey to believe surveillance was normal, that privacy was optional, that if you had nothing to hide, you had nothing to fear. But here's the twist. When you watch everyone, you also start watching yourself. The digital net kept expanding. What started as counterterrorism morphed into predictive policing, facial recognition, social media monitoring, AI-powered watch lists, and suddenly, no one was safe from the system. Not immigrants, not journalists, not protesters, not even elected officials. The US government built a machine to catch the bad guys, but over time it stopped asking who the bad guys even were. Activists were labeled threats. Whistleblowers were hunted, the press was watched. The Jackal was now tracking its own reflection. And that reflection? It's you, it's me, it's all of us. Feeding data into systems we never voted for, systems we don't understand, systems that learn faster than we can fight back. What makes this era terrifying isn't just the surveillance, it's how invisible it's become. We click accept on terms of service we don't read. We let smart devices listen just in case. We use facial ID to unlock our phones. Convenience, right? But those little decisions add up. Surveillance isn't a building anymore. It's a culture. It's an expectation. It's a trade-off between freedom and ease. And it's a bargain we were never fully conscious of signing. The Jackal no longer has to sneak. It lives in your feed. And the cage? It's made of comfort. What began with a terror attack turned into a war machine, which turned into a global surveillance empire, which turned into a digital prison of our own making. The US didn't lose its power. It lost its soul chasing control. And now, the Jackal sits inside its own trap, watching itself, trying to predict its own next move, not realizing that the more it watches, the less it understands. Because true control doesn't come from surveillance, it comes from trust. And we gave that up a long time ago. If this shook something in you, do me a favor. Like, subscribe and share at JustAnotherMessenger with someone who thinks I've got nothing to hide is still a valid argument. And drop a comment below regarding the question, are we still the watchers or are we just watched? Until next time, stay sharp, question everything, and read the fine print.
Now that the Jackal has survived its pathway from 1754 to 2025, the delusion has been revealed. The path of its illusion has been revealed. And is the Jackal attempting to revisit a previous path to the Gilded Age with the rebranded name of a mega reboot? As you see with Pillman turning the strains of capitalism, monopoly, wage slavery, plutocracy on the employees, the working class people that are now experiencing high rent, high groceries, high commodities, low savings, creating a wage gap. Now, this is the condition of the laboring man at Pullman. Now, as you can see, this mega reboot, or can it also be seen as the Jackal is creating a new pathway towards plutocracy? Now, what is plutocracy? It doesn't matter if it's a donkey, a Republican, or a Democrat. But right now, there's a Republican office. Is there plutocracy being created? Is the Jackal creating a new path towards plutocracy? It's a type of government that effectively allows only wealthy people to rule, which can result in policies exclusively designed to assist the wealthy, such as a dynamic is reflected in the world itself. Now, the Greek word, this is a Greek word, and it means Plutos and Kratos, and it's translated to wealthy and power, respectfully. We have to look at these things as we have journeyed along the pathway of the Jackal from 1754, from its origins, from its pathway from the four-legged mythological jackal to the two-legged jackal that spearheaded in 1754 to its present day jackal of 2025. There's nothing new along the pathway. It's just a new carving to an existing road of rebranding what exists to try to reform it and make it better. Now, how do we reclaim this narrative? How do you reclaim the narrative and restore, have restoration? Because I know there's a lot of conversation regarding reparation. As you can see, reparation that will not change the status, which means the subjugation, usurpation, colonization. It will not change the status in which you're under. Restoration changed its status. In international law, it's called post-millennia. It's called being restored back to the status in which you were after the war has ended. So if the war has ended between the British nations and the United States nations against the indigenous nations must be restored back to its pre-loss condition. How do we reclaim that narrative? So we don't just, or are we going to just allow the replacement of one jackal to another, as this current jackal has over leveraged themselves financially, and the gross domestic products of commodities value tanks, and more currency, medium currency is being owed to other nations? Could there be a change in a new master? We have to look at this. So unless you desire to maintain the status of subjugation, you will continue to fight for your master to make course correction in his current day's society. Or you will open the eyes of illusion and see the pathways of destruction that has taken place against the original inhabitants nations and rebuild anew. Now, until next time, we're going to ask that you stay woke, stay informed, and stay ready. Also, stay on the lookout for my book launch, Sacred Selfishness, The Art of Loving Without Losing Yourself. Are you ready to reclaim your power in love? What if you have never had to chase love again? What if you could give love without exhausting yourself? What if putting yourself first actually made your relationship stronger? This book will teach you how to love from abundance, not scarcity, how to prioritize without yourself without guilt, how to love deeply while standing fully in power. And it's time to embrace the most radical act of love, and that's choosing yourself. And in order to choose yourself first, in order to rebuild a nation, you have to choose yourself first, to say you are better, you are in a most better loving position to be in your divine position of sovereignty than to be subjugated and be comfort. Continue to tune in to us every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are not monetized on YouTube, so please support the channel via our CashApp at $ at JustAnotherMessenger. If you or someone you know would like to be a part of the conversations that matter, because we are more than just talk, please send an email to JustAnotherMessengerPodcast@gmail.com. Next week, we will not be going live. We'll be on vacation. We're going to get with the family, the kin folks, and we're going to take a little journey through the land and have some rest and relaxation. After coming off a time period of transitioning of one of our loved ones, we're going to spend some time together and love on each other. So next week, we will not be airing. We'll be coming back the following week thereafter, and we're going to come back with new information, just to keep these conversations open, because we are the messenger. Thank you for tuning in this evening, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.